Okay, that's correct. That's correct. That one. It's so good. Oh, it's so good. Oh, Flight 1 has had this for years. I know. Tell me in the comments. It's so good that Betaflight finally caught up. They finally caught up with Flight 1. I remember hearing around Christmas of 2020, Betaflight 4.3 is, oh, it's pretty close to release. Oh yeah, it's getting real close. Maybe we'll see Betaflight 4.3 release in the spring. And I thought, oh, I better get ready to do a new tutorial about the new version of Betaflight 4.3. And here we are. It is now November of 2021 and Betaflight 4.3 still isn't here. But I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of waiting. Let's do it. Let's try Betaflight 4.3. It's probably pretty stable, right? I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're going to learn something today. Let me be honest with you. I usually don't make tutorial videos about pre-release stuff. And there's two reasons for that. Number one is that when you make a video about a pre-release, something might change and then the video becomes completely invalid, and things are always changing. Right? Things change, videos go out of date, so fine. But number two, nightly builds, pre-release stuff is not guaranteed to be stable. And in fact, if we look right here at this download link for the Betaflight configurator nightly, it says this is a nightly build. It may be unstable and result in corrupted configurations or data loss used only for testing. So this entire video has a great big disclaimer in front of it that the code that I'm going to be testing and using here could have bugs, and the worst case scenario is that your quad like flies to the moon. You lose control, you lose your quad. Maybe you lose control and you injure yourself or you damage something. Okay, now the disclaimer's out of the way. I gotta say, a whole lot of other people whose opinion I trust are running these nightlies and are making tutorials about how to update them. And I finally went, okay, I guess we're just doing it now. So let's do it. And the first thing I'm going to do is download the Betaflight configurator. And you may think, well, I've already got Betaflight configurator installed on my machine, right? Here it is. What do I need to install Betaflight configurator? Betaflight configurator 10.7.1 is the latest official release. Betaflight configurator 10.8.0, the nightly build, which is not released, is required to work with Betaflight 4.3. You cannot use Betaflight 10.7 with Betaflight 4.3. It won't work. Well, I mean, it'll seem to work, but it'll make problems. So this link is down in the video description, as well as all the links and a table of contents if you want to work your way through this video. There's also timestamps or chapter markers in the timeline just to help you navigate what might turn out to be a long video. I'm going to go down and I'm going to download the installer from my operating system, which is Windows. So I'm going to download win64.exe and go ahead and install that. And when I do that, I'm going to get a warning here. Windows is protecting your PC because this app is unrecognized. Don't freak out. The nightly builds of Betaflight configurator are not digitally signed, and so your virus scanner or operating system may freak out. They're safe. They don't have a virus. Just go ahead and whitelist it or say okay or approve or whatever it is you need to do to get it to run. Or if that's going to scare you off, then just quit now. Right? There's a lot sketchier things we're going to do by running nightly code than installing an app from an unsigned source. And when we're done, here is Betaflight configurator, but you see in the upper left, it says 10.8.0 and then debug and a code that indicates the build number. But we want to see 10.8.0 there before we proceed. The next thing we're going to do is plug in our quadcopter, and like always, when updating firmware, we want to back up the configuration of our flight controller. When we plug in the quadcopter, a new COM port should appear up here, and that indicates that the computer is talking to the flight controller and sees your drivers are all set up and your USB cable is working right and so forth. If you don't see a new COM port when you plug in your flight controller, it could mean your drivers are messed up, but most modern operating systems, the drivers are pre-installed and ready to go. The other thing it could mean is that your USB cable is messed up. It could be because some USB cables are charge only, like if it's the cable that came with your phone. It could be charging only and not data. So make sure you've got a USB cable that can pass data. So we see this COM port appear here, and we're going to hit connect. And now we're looking at our flight controller. But this is Betaflight 4.2. Let's go ahead and back up our configuration. And to do that, we're going to go to the CLI tab, and we're going to type diff all. What that's going to output is the difference, everything that is different about this configuration compared to the defaults for this flight controller. Once we've done that, we're going to hit Save to File, and we're going to save that to a file somewhere on the computer. In fact, you should probably have a folder somewhere with all your flight controller file saves. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to put this flight controller into bootloader mode. And bootloader mode means that it is ready to be flashed with new firmware. And there's several different ways to do that. Since we're in the CLI, we could type BL for bootloader, and that would do it. Another thing we can do is, by the way, you'd have to hit enter after hitting BL, but I didn't. Okay, you probably knew that. Another thing we can do is here in the Setup tab, we can hit Activate Bootloader /DFU button, or we can just go to the Update Firmware tab, and when you try to update, it will automatically try to put your flight controller into bootloader mode. You may not even need to explicitly put it into bootloader mode. When you try to put your flight controller into bootloader mode, the way you'll know it's working correctly is that you'll see up here in the upper right, DFU, STM32 bootloader, and that tells you it's worked correctly. On some Windows machines, there's a problem with the DFU driver. This is less common now than it used to be because these issues have sort of been sorted out. If you don't see DFU in the upper right, the thing to do is to look at your flight controller, and somewhere on your flight controller will be a bootloader button. A little button, I'm sure that the camera isn't seeing it, but it's here by the USB port on mine. A little button that you press, you hold that button down and you plug in the USB, and that forces your flight controller into DFU mode. You'll know it's in DFU mode because the LEDs, they'll have a solid red power LED, but the status LED that usually blinks will not be blinking, and that'll confirm that your flight controller thinks it's in DFU mode. At that point, if you don't see DFU up here in the upper right, there's an app called the Impulse RC Driver Fixer. You can download it from Impulse RC here. It is this app right here. And in fact, I have it on my taskbar, although I haven't had to use it in a while, so maybe I should get it off of there. If you have put your flight controller into DFU mode, but you don't see DFU here in the pull down, then you can run the Impulse RC Driver Fixer, and it should fix your driver and it should work. Okay, so now we have a link in the video description as always. Once we've got the flight controller into DFU mode, we're going to go to the Firmware Flasher tab, and the next thing we need to do is enable Show Unstable Releases, because we're going to be flashing a nightly build. We'll also need to enable Expert Mode, and then we're going to go to this pull down which says Releases, and we're going to choose Development Builds, and these are going to be the nightly builds. Now in this pull down menu, the builds are prefixed by the date of the build. So this one is November 4th of November 2021. And if you go down, you'll see there's other builds there. If you know for a fact that there's a particular build number that you want, you can pick it, but I'm just going to pick the latest one. There have been times when, for example, in a certain build, Immersion RC Ghost support was broken. And Immersion RC put out a note saying, hey, don't use builds past this date because it breaks Ghost support. So usually you won't have a particular date in mind. You'll just pick the latest one. But if you do have a particular date in mind, that's how to tell. Now I'm going to go open up that config file that I saved because I need a piece of information from it, and that is my board name or my target name. And you can see here at the top it says version, and then it says board name JBF7. That information is what you need in order to flash the correct firmware to your board. So whatever yours says here after board name, you're going to want to remember that information. And then here in Betaflight Configurator, you're going to select that from this pull-down menu. You can even, oh, look at that. They've added the search functionality. That's awesome. We can select JBF7, and then we're going to load firmware and flash firmware. And then we're going to accept this warning or not. If you're scared, don't proceed. And we're going to flash. After the flash is successful, we can connect. And a Betaflight will ask, do you want to apply custom defaults? You absolutely should. You should always do that, or the board will not be configured and not work right. Like you won't have any ports in your UARTs, or you won't have any UARTs in your ports tab if you don't say yes to that. And we will connect again. And now we have Betaflight 4.3, and we can start restoring our configuration from the old version. The next thing I'm going to do is make a copy. So I'll right-click copy and right-click paste. I'm going to make a copy of my CLI dump file because it's not actually safe to take that CLI dump file and paste it directly from Betaflight 4.2 into Betaflight 4.3. And that's always true. Anytime you've got a major dot release, 4.0 to 4.1, 4.1 to 4.2, and so forth, it's not safe to just paste the whole config dump back in. Some things will have changed and you might mess it up. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this copy of the config dump and we're going to go through it and we're going to find the parts that are safe to carry forward, because that'll help us set up our quadcopter faster. We're going to cut out the parts that aren't safe. This is actually the same as a video I made back in 2019, upgrade to Betaflight 4.1, the fastest, simplest, easiest way. But let's go ahead and update that for Betaflight 4.2 and see what's different. The first thing you might want to know is that any line that starts with this pound symbol or hash symbol is commented out. It's informational and it doesn't really matter if you retain it for this purposes. So we will just go ahead and remove those just to clean things up. We can delete that, doesn't really matter. This stuff, board name, manufacturer ID, MCU ID, and so forth, you can remove. That will be included with the new board. Motor resource assignments, those can be carried forward. We can leave this in. I don't have my board mounted facing straight, so I've had to do some motor remapping in order to make the motors work right. If you've got any of that, you can keep it. Any features that you've got here in the feature section, you can keep. Your serial lines, that's basically your ports tab, and you can keep that. Your aux lines, that's basically your modes tab, and you can keep that. If you have a VTX table, because you're doing smart audio or tramp telemetry, you can keep that. And then we come here to master, and here's the first place that we're definitely going to want to pause and not just keep everything. Rather than go through master and like read out every damn thing here, I mean, that might be fun to do in another video. What I think I'm going to do is just delete the things that I know you probably shouldn't keep. Like anything that relates to the PIDs, the filters, maybe that stuff is safe to carry forward, but the Betaflight devs have put all this work into Betaflight 4.3 and the PIDs and filters and so forth, and I just want to kind of experience that fresh rather than try and sort of slap something on top of it. The accelerometer calibration, safe to carry forward. The min check and max check values, that tells the flight controller when my throttle is or my sticks are up or down. Those are safe to carry forward. Serial RX provider, that's what type of receiver you've got. That is safe to carry forward. Serial RX half duplex, it's safe to carry forward. Your black box ratio, that's your black box logging rate, safe. Bidirectional D-shot on or off, safe. Your motor protocol, safe. Your board alignment, your flight controller alignment, safe. VBAT scale, safe. Small angle, that prevents the quadcopter from arming when it's unlevel, and I always set it to 180 and turn it off. We can carry that forward. And then we come to a bunch of lines that start with set OSD. All of these lines that start with set OSD relate to the on-screen display and are safe to carry forward. Debug mode, that relates to black box configuration, that is safe to carry forward. VTX band channel power, etc., safe to carry forward. When we get here to this section, profile, I'm going to suggest that you do not bring any of that forward. That relates to your PIDs and filters. And although the PIDs between Betaflight 4.2 and 4.3 are basically compatible, like if you have a set of PIDs that you love under 4.2, probably they're going to be similar under 4.3. But again, I want to just experience 4.3 fresh. So I'm going to take out all the profile stuff. And then we come to rate profile, which is your rates. And all I've got here are my basic rates. So that's probably going to be safe to carry forward. The one thing that is going to catch me though is that Betaflight 4.3 has changed the default rate type from Betaflight rates to, I believe it's actual rates. So if I just leave this like so, the default rate type is going to be different and my rates will be completely different. So actually what I'm going to want to do is, let's just go to the CLI and type dump. And we can see it says set rates type actual right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to type set rates underscore type equals Betaflight. Now, if you prefer to keep actual rates, that's up to you. I'm going to copy that, and I'm just going to put that here in my rate profile, because that's just what my rates are used to being. Now that brings us to the end of the CLI dump, but actually there may be more there, because remember, this was a diff, and there were some things that I didn't change, but you might have changed. So let's look at this dump. I've typed dump all, which dumps out the entire configuration. Let's copy that to clipboard, and let's make a new file here and paste that in. And let's look at other things that we might or might not want to carry forward. All of these sections near the top of the config dump, here we are with features and serial, and we talked about those previously. Mixer, if you have custom motor mixer for some reason, safe. If you have servos set up, safe to carry forward. Any beeper settings that you've customized, safe to carry forward. Beacon, this is your D-Shot motor beeper. If you're using that, safe to carry forward. Your channel map here, safe to carry forward if you've modified that. Any LED settings and LED color settings, safe to carry forward. Mode color, that's all related to LEDs and colors, safe. Adja range, that's your in-flight adjustments tab. If you've customized that, safe to carry forward. RX range, if you've customized your endpoints using the RX range command, it's safe to carry forward. The VTX section, safe to carry forward. The RX fail section or failsafe settings, if you've customized those, safe to carry forward. And then again, we come to master, and I'm just going to say there may be things in master that are safe to carry forward, but unless it's one of the things I previously mentioned, you should probably leave it alone and not mess with it. Okay, so what we're going to end up with here is this file, which is all of the things from my old config that I know are safe to carry forward. And then I'm just going to select all and copy. And then here in the CLI dump, I'm going to paste that in. I'm going to click in the text field, paste it in, and hit enter. Now, there was a red. I saw something red. If there's something red, and if there's anything in red, it means that that parameter has changed between Betaflight 4.2 and 4.3, and whatever you were trying to do didn't get done. So in this case, it's black box P ratio, which is the black box logging rate. They maybe have changed that parameter or something in 4.3. That's not mission critical, so I'm just going to go ahead. When I'm done, I'm going to type save. Oh, errors were detected. Please fix them. Can I not just... Yeah, okay. Just do it again. Now I'm going to connect to Betaflight, and I'm just going to sanity check the configuration. Looks like I pretty much remember it being. Some things are going to be in different places than we expect because Betaflight 4.3 has moved them. But, and in fact, what I should probably do is let's go ahead and plug a battery in and turn on the controller and test things out. Now, some of you are going to notice that I do have my props on and are going to suggest that maybe it's not the safest thing in the world to do to have props on when you're playing with a new configuration and you're maybe not sure that it's all worked, especially because this is a nightly build and could have some mission critical bug. But I am using a smoke stopper here. If the quadcopter tries to pull more than 1 amp, boom, it'll just shut off. And so there's not much risk there to the prop. Nothing's going to happen. Turn the controller on. I just switched this controller to Edge TX. Yeah, I'm living on the edge, boys. Betaflight 4.3 and Edge TX. If you want to know why I switched to Edge TX on my daily driver, I've got a video out. 6 reasons to switch to Edge TX today. And I'll put a link in the video description if you want to check that out. So the first thing I always check is the receiver. And I make sure I have movement. And I check my endpoints. They're not perfect, 2003. That's pretty close though. Channels are moving correctly. All good there. In the modes tab, let's just check my modes. And I am going to flip the arm switch here, but the quad shouldn't arm because it's plugged in. Well, arming is to say as in tried to enable, angle mode, etc. All my modes are working correctly. Looks good there. Let's go to the setup tab and make sure that my board alignment is correct. And while I'm there, I'll put the quad flat on the desk and just calibrate the accelerometer. We did carry forward the accelerometer calibration from the previous version, but hey, you can always calibrate your accelerometer again. So I'll just pitch the quad forward. Oh no, okay, I see. So you see how the quad is pointed to the side, but in real life the quad is pointed away from me? To fix that, just point the quad away from yourself and hit reset Z-axis. And that will reset this 3D model to point away from yourself and match it up with the real quad. Yep, back, left, right? Forward. Okay, that's all correct. Looking good. At this point, there are a few more steps of the function check I could do, like double check the motor mapping is gotten carried forward, but I'm not going to make you sit through me doing that. If you've built a quad before, then you will know how to go through those steps. And pasting in the CLI dump, as I showed you, should have successfully carried that configuration forward. What I want to do now is just look at this new Betaflight 4.3 and see what's changed. Like, what do we got here? In the setup tab, nothing is different. Ports tab looks pretty much the same. Configuration tab. Configuration tab, some things have been shuffled around. And it also looks like some things have been moved out of the configuration tab. Like, for example, the motor setup is not here. The motor protocol setup. Power and battery tab. Oh, very nice. So the power and battery tab is showing the maximum voltage and the maximum amperage that can be displayed based on the scale that we've got here, the amp and the voltage scale. And the reason for that is that the sensors that sense voltage and current max out at 3.3 volts. That's a 0 to 3.3 volt signal. So based on the multiplier of your calibration scale, there's a maximum voltage and amperage that can possibly be measured. It's nice that they're showing that. Really cool. It's worth pointing out that this limit only applies if your current meter source is onboard ADC. If your current meter source is ESC sensor, then the scaling is being done in the ESC, and the maximum value is whatever the ESC designer decided it would be. So this doesn't apply if you're using ESC sensor like I am. In the PID tuning tab, there is a lot different. So a whole bunch of new sliders have been added. And descriptions for the sliders written, I think, by Mark Spatz, if I'm not incorrect. Things like damping, tracking, stick response, instead of just D gain, P, and I gain, to kind of give a little bit more of description, and tool text as well. I'm pretty sure Mark wrote the tool text here. There's additional sliders as well that let you tweak, for example, the pitch axis by itself versus tweaking the pitch and roll axis together. Mark Spatz has a video about these new sliders, and I'll put a link to his video down in the video description if you want to learn more about them. I'm not going to dive too deep into them right now because this is one of the things that may be changing or tweaked between now and the final release, so I don't want to waste time diving in. Here in the rate profile, as I mentioned previously, the default rates are now actual rates, which are easier to configure. I've got a video about actual rates versus Betaflight rates. I'll put a link to it in the video description if you want to understand how they work. I'm going to be sticking to Betaflight rates because it's what I'm used to, but maybe someday I'll find some actual rates that work better for me. Here in the filters tab, things mostly look the same, but one change that the devs have made is if you enable or disable the gyro RPM filter, you're using bidirectional D-shot and RPM filtering, the dynamic notch filter settings will automatically update. In fact, we'll give you a warning right here. This used to be a change that you would make manually. When you enable the gyro RPM filter, it basically does the job that the dynamic notch filter usually does, but just not the dynamic notch just doesn't do it as well. So when you enable gyro RPM filter, you change the dynamic notch filter settings so that the dynamic notch filter does a different job that it can do more effectively. And now the configurator automatically makes those changes for you instead of making you make them. That's pretty cool. Here in the receiver tab, oh look, here is now where you put your serial receiver provider instead of the configuration tab. Makes sense, right? Your receiver settings will be in the receiver tab. So here's the receiver type and the receiver provider. And in fact, I'm so excited to have Betaflight 4.3 because finally I can actually have Immersion RC Ghost instead of SRXL2 coming out of my Ghost receiver. And let's just even see if that works. Oh, we have telemetry. I'm so happy. I'm so happy. Yay, it's working. And yay, I have telemetry in my radio. SRXL2 telemetry didn't work. So good. Yeah, there it is. So they've added a bind receiver button. So some receivers, Betaflight can tell the receiver to go into bind mode, mostly Spectrum receivers. Some SPI-based receivers, like found on Tiny Whoops, are the same. But what's the CLI command to do it? On some versions, it's bind. Sometimes it's bind_RX. It's all completely inconsistent. It looks like the Betaflight devs have added this bind receiver button so that if you have a receiver that Betaflight can put into bind mode, it'll just be right there and you just hit the button and it'll do it. But if we switch to Immersion RC Ghost, which doesn't support that, that option goes away. You just have to press the bind button on the Ghost receiver. Here in the Motors tab, I see that these motor options, which used to be in the Configuration tab, have moved to the Motors tab. And in addition, there is a very, very exciting motor direction and reorder motors buttons. Dang, I have to take the props off, but you gotta see this. All right, so now the props are off and I'm gonna hit the reorder motors button. I understand the risks, propellers are removed, and we're gonna hit start. And it's gonna spin a motor and it says, click on the spinning motor. Oh, check the motor spinning order by clicking on the image. Okay, that's correct. That's correct. That one. It's so good. Oh, it's so good. Oh, Flight 1 has had this for years. I know. Tell me in the comments. It's so good to have Betaflight finally caught up. They finally caught up with Flight 1. Yeah, but you can buy a Betaflight flight controller now. Go buy a Flight 1. Go buy a Falco X flight controller. They're not in stock. So, you know, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So good. Save. Oh, so good. So good. Oh. And then there's the motor direction. We can test the motor directions. And this is pretty cool too. What we're going to do is we're going to, let's just use the wizard. It's going to spin the motors and it'll ask you to change the motor direction and if you need to. Now, I don't actually need to do that. But basically what Betaflight is doing is it is using D-shot commands to reverse the motors. And it's always been able to do this, but it never has, except when you use turtle mode, right? When you use turtle mode, it reverses the motors and flips the quad over. Why can't it just know I need to reverse motor number 1 when I power up instead of making you go into BL Heli? That's right. Now you don't have to go into BL Heli anymore to reverse your motors. You can just do it from within Betaflight. So good. So good. And that's it. Basically, that looks like what has changed so far. I am looking forward to flying this. This dark out right now and I can't fly it today. I'll probably put that in a separate video, but I'm super excited to get to try Betaflight 4.3 and to give you guys a preview of what is coming. If you are interested in any of these sort of exclusive features that are in Betaflight 4.3, like Immersion RC Ghost support, or you just want to see what some are saying is the best Betaflight has ever flown, they say that about every release. Maybe it's even true. Follow the instructions in this video and let me know what you think down in the comments. If this video has helped you out, if you value the kind of content I'm making, can I remind you I have a Patreon. Patreon is a way that you can subscribe to me for as little as $2 a month or more. If you feel like I've earned it, it's completely up to you how much you decide to give. You subscribe using the link in the video description and it helps me, basically live, pay my bills, eat, etc. If not, that's fine. I help everybody regardless. I don't go and check to see if you're a Patreon before I answer your email or your messages. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them. I'll do my best to answer all the ones that I get. But if you do decide to support me, it sure does mean a lot. That's going to do it for this video. Happy flying. Patrons are the people who make all this possible. Not to disrespect you, because you're watching all the way to the end, which really helps the analytics. So I guess without you watching, none of this would be possible. But if you would subscribe or join my Patreon, $2 a month or more, it's up to you. Or at the very least, leave a comment or click the affiliate links and do the show. Isn't it a beautiful day? Man, the lighting looks good out here. What's up, y'all? Out for a walk.